enough oxytocin. So all these factors are going to have huge, disastrous effects. Not so much now, and people will get used to that, but I think gradually you're going to see depression and mental health clearly go down, which is great for the pharmaceutical companies, but not great for everybody else.
So you're not, unless you've got your own lockable office, you're not in a work environment.
Yeah.
So you have the distractions of home. Even worse, of course, if there's no school and you've got kids. They've also done research, and they found that creativity is much more in terms of solution finding if you work face to face. Also, you're 34 times more likely to respond positively to a request made face to face than you are to a request made by email. 34 times. And the reason for that, as I said, is because we are hardwired to be collaborative. Because unless you're collaborative, then you can't have tribal behavior, and we are tribal. So we are naturally collaborative. But to be collaborative, you need the eye contact, you need the oxytocin, and of course you don't get that if you're working from home. And as you said, you're right, you're not part of a team, you don't get that sense, so you start feeling lonely, and lonely is toxic to the mental health anyway. So it's a complete and utter disaster. It's complete nonsense.
So it's going to affect you physically,
emotionally, mentally. Creatively, almost certainly in productivity in the medium to long term. But the artifact, the confounding variable, is of course how unsuitable our modern lives for us are at the moment anyway. So if you tell someone, okay, you can stop commuting an hour and a half through an awful journey to work, and you don't have to spend all that money, and you don't have to go and collect your kids, and all you have to do is open up your laptop. Of course, people are going to say, wow, this is so much better. But then, of course, they then reach the next problem is, well, how do I organize myself at home? So then there's a little bit of a hiccup for the first couple of weeks. So most people seem to find a stride when they reach week 3 of working from home. But apart from that, all the other negatives are still there.
Yeah, and also you've got to also take into account that not everyone's personality is suited, or temperament is suited to working from home, because there are so many distractions. I'll put the washing on, which is a pattern interrupt. So they put the washing on, or maybe they'll make themselves a cup of coffee, and and obviously, it's very clear that over the years, even from Victorian times, where our attention span was so much higher, is drastically reduced now, because people used to read a lot more in those days because there was no television to keep them to interrupt them. But I remember even when my daughter was in primary school, they were teaching 10-minute segments, because kids were so used to, people were so used to watching YouTube in 3-minute bites, that their attention spans are probably worse than a goldfish in some ways.
Well, put it this way: when during exams in exam halls or in a library where concentration is required, you have total peace and quiet, don't you? And people who have innate difficulties concentrating, such as attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, are officially allowed, they are sanctioned to have a separate, even quieter room, and to be given extra time for their exams. This is the importance of total lack of distraction to be able to concentrate and perform optimally, and you do not get that at home. And you're absolutely right about certain types of people. So the only people who are potentially capable of working from home, and even then a significant portion of them won't be able to, are on the right shift of the autistic scale. In other words, if you're slightly more Aspergian.
I'd say introverted, but
because those people they're not interested in socializing. They are less empathic. They don't need.
They can keep their head down and get on with it.
They don't need the social contact as much. They're happier in their own company, and so they can simply get on with things.
And extroverted people who are more creative, you'll find their creativity actually go down because they're not bouncing off other people.
As the research has shown, absolutely right. So working from home is a complete disaster. Now, of course, what the government should have been doing, which is what other countries in Europe do, is actually supplement the cost of public transport. So if you go to Athens, if you go to China, the public transport is massively supplemented, and it's a proper system. It works, and it hasn't.
Yeah, but isn't that the country that literally have station police who shove people onto the trains, or is that Japan? I don't know if you ever seen the. They're literally they pack them in like sardines, and they're actually literally pushing people in as the doors are closing to make sure they can cram them in as much as possible, which is not healthy either, by the way. So
it's unsurprising that the corona started over there, isn't it?
But look, I mean, the thing is, next 20 years, I'm not even sure whether they'll be able to have trains running automatically. There'll be driverless trains, so they'll be able to operate on a far larger scale, which means the cost of personnel that they actually have to hire aren't going to be required anymore, which is going to screw up the unions a little bit. But hey, so you're going to see that decline. In fact, actually, I'm just wondering, because we're having a coffee today in our coffee shop, and I'm just wondering what's probably likely to happen is even the coffee shop industry is going to be affected by this, because a lot of people who can't work from home will potentially go and work in a coffee shop and get the find a plug point, get their laptops out, work from there, order their one cup of coffee every couple of hours, which is taking up the desk space or the table space, which means they are not getting enough. The coffee shops will not get enough footfall in. So it would almost be worth having these little clusters of offices like WeWorks on a smaller scale, where people can actually go in on a geographical way, on a far cheaper, locally, where people can actually go and actually work, and they pay I wouldn't say a nominal fee, but enough of a fee that would make it profitable for the company to actually run it, but not an excessive cost. Because let's face it, going into town would cost sometimes £200 a month, or probably more.
You could actually extrapolate that to remote offices, and what I mean by that is
desk space.
Well, indeed, you could have something
hot desks.
You could have something like a WeWorks, but the companies would actually rent the space. So in other words, the companies would look and say, okay, how many employees have you got in that area? Right, you guys, because it's now only a 10-minute walk for you or commute for you, you're going to go there 3 days a week. So at least you got your sense of team, and they have their work space and their office space within that. I think that would be a very clever idea.
And also, and actually, that could probably even change the recruiting process as well. Because look, there's a lot of people with skills out there. They are in abundance, and you could probably even start thinking about actually recruiting people geographically on where they live to actually go and work in that workspace. Because with so much automation, it's probably. That you could still hire someone with an expert skill set that could still work around the system. Because let's face it, a bookkeeper right now can use can use a software to be able to do most of their work fairly easily. It doesn't take the level of expertise required to do that, for example, is probably been dramatically reduced. If you see what I mean.
Yeah. But you see, what one of the big problems again is the way that the capitalism has been developing, because of course people are being priced out of London, and so why should someone work all the hours God send, including their partner, so they can afford an overpriced mortgage? And that's why more and more people are moving further away, and then they're having to commute more, so then they have £5,000 bills for the public transport into work every year, or even more. And the fact is, the government should be way on top of that. It should not be allowing that to happen, but it has done, so that you have all this foreign open quotes, dirty, close quotes money from God knows where coming into central London, which means that right now in central London the majority of house purchases are made by people with foreign passports. I mean, what is the point of that if it's the capital city of the country, when in fact it is the right of individuals to be able to at least satisfactorily live and work in that place? And the government has not been doing that. Well, not just this government, but a lot of governments. And so that, you and I might have been able to buy a one-bedroom flat with our starting wage. But when we first started
like
work,
30 years ago.
That's right. But nowadays, you haven't got a hope in hell, even if you hit your 40s or 50s. And that is part of the Pareto principle, where the money gets concentrated more and more in a small proportion of the community.
Well, they did talk about there was some data that came out probably about 3 or 4 years ago. I remember reading that if you go down the current system of school, university, job, etc., and you go down that road now, by the time you're able to have actually afford your own house, you're actually about 54 years old. Because by the time you've incurred the student debt and everything else, and you're taking a low starting wage and start paying everything back, and the cost of living, and particularly living in London, it's 54 years old before you'll be able to afford to buy your own property. Hence, you have more people living at home. But also, think about it, you have kids living at home far longer, becoming less independent, more reliant on their parents, and therefore, is that developing their character?
Of course not.
Or is that weakening their character?
So
there's so many different domino effects going on here.
Well, there is.
All over the place.
And you see that the thing is, all that's happening is it's getting worse and worse. And society itself is disintegrating with everything becoming faceless. So it's identity politics all over again. And although I suspected that certainly the governments cannot have any other agenda rather than surviving being in power, so all this fiasco and nonsense over coronavirus, I said, or I think, isn't due to any particular government agenda and is simply an artifact of media hysteria. There is, of course, an overall theory that there are certain powers that be that want to have a world government. And to achieve a world government, you first of all need to deprive everyone of their identity. And what better way of doing it than by making everyone wear masks? Because if you apply cold logic, all this corona stuff and mask wearing is completely illogical, because it is so obvious to anyone who takes a moment to logically think about it that the cure is far, far worse than the problem.
And you're talking about, this whole theory of world order is obviously keeps coming up, and you talk about the Illuminati and who's been controlled, and the what was that group? Was it Bundaberg Group or some hotel in Holland or something? Or all these influential people meet once a year, but no one really knows. No one can necessarily get in, so it's the little inner circle of people who looking to control. And that's just a direct route towards socialism. The state tells you how to live and control you.
The Illuminati have actually...
Which is going away from... I know you don't necessarily agree with capitalism, but it's what takes it... but it's the total opposite. There's no free market, no free trade.
The Illuminati...
They tell you how to live.
...are essentially trying to destabilise all current structure in order to cause so much pain that people will accept a single world order. And theoretically, and there is a certain body of evidence that they actually manufactured and caused all the world wars. So it's definitely the First World War and Second World War and a potential Third World War.
Well,
coming up.
they even talked about the Twin Towers 9/11 was subject to that as well, didn't they? I mean, there's conspiracy theories. I mean, it's very hard to know what to believe because there's so many being bandied about. The COVID, I think, is a little bit of a conspiracy theory as well.
But you see, that the point to make is the world is full of intelligent people, and although most behaviour is emotional, there are enough people